My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guests are Dave Talan and Angel Connell, the co-chairman of the Providence Republican City Committee. Well, gentlemen, welcome to the State of the State.
Thanks. Glad to be here, Dick.
Now, Mayor Brett Smiley has submitted a budget request, I guess we'd call it, of $624 million. His announcement said that it includes, and I quote, responsible cuts. And he describes some of these cuts as the removal of 23 staff positions, reduced public safety overtime by $3.2 million by increasing staffing in the police and fire departments. It's not clear, I think, from the announcement whether that is a net savings after you figure in the salary and benefits of the new hires. Increasing the real estate tax on single-family homes by 4%, while reducing, quote, dramatically the tax on many apartments and multifamily buildings, and a commitment of more than $55 million to help transform, quote again, transform historic buildings and vacant commercial spaces into affordable housing. Does this mean they're going to be subsidized with Section 8 or what? Not quite clear in that either. Angel, why don't you start off and tell us what's your reaction to this whole budget proposal?
Well, I'm very disappointed in the mayor because I understand that he had a gun put to his head by the judge saying that you have to cough up X amount of dollars to cover the school department's deficiencies and all that. But the whole thing behind that was that they were going to have an audit of the school department. My understanding is that they did have an audit, but we have no idea what the audit results are. So it doesn't make any sense to me that you would propose tax increases without taking a look at the audit report and have an idea as to, okay, what do we need to cut in the school department? What do we need to consolidate? That should be the first thing.
Yeah. Dave, I understand that Providence does have an internal auditor position in its city government. Was this audit done by the outside independent auditors?
No, it was done by a nationally recognized accounting firm, Alvarez and Marcel, or A&M as they're known. And the audit was just on the school department portion of the budget,
right,
which of course is 55% of the city budget. So, all the mayor has been talking about is the other 45%, police, fire, public works, parks, recreation, and ignoring the other 55%. Well, that's not really a serious look at the city budget. And I know I've had a chance to actually get a sneak peek of the A&M audit, and pretty much what it showed is contrary to what people are saying, is that we're not spending enough money on the schools. What they came up with is we're spending too much money on the schools, and they estimated $35 million too much. And mostly not on the stuff that involves the children in the classroom, but on the part of the school budget that has nothing to do with the classrooms, which, believe it or not, is more than a third of the budget. And they're finding massive overspending in that. Pretty much what we predicted they would find. Obviously, they're spending $10 million too much on busing. The administrative office is massively overstaffed. Potential saving of multi-million dollars there. They have a lot of private contracts that go out, a lot of which nobody can really figure out what they do. And one of the things we discovered also was that the State Commissioner of Education on Helliker and Fonte Green does a report card on every single school in the entire state. And, in addition to giving them grades on English and math or whatever, they also come up with the average cost per student of every child in each individual school,
right,
which in Providence is roughly about $17,000 per child. And then at the end, they also give a summary for the whole Providence School District, and they give the average cost per child for the whole Providence School District, and it comes out to $27,000 per child, a difference of $10,000. So basically that difference is what's being spent on things that don't involve the classroom or the individual school. And that's a lot of money, and that's where all the real waste is. The waste is not on what happens to the child in the classroom with the individual teacher. The waste is in all the bureaucracy and everything else. And the mayor is not even talking about any of that. He's making suggestions on the 45% of the city budget that's not related to the schools, and the things that nobody takes seriously, like only picking up the garbage once every 2 weeks instead of once a week. I mean, that's not a serious proposal. We'd have a filthy city if they did something like that. And he's talking about cutting money from community centers, recreation centers, libraries. Again, things that people would never approve of. And he knows that people would never approve of it. So he's saying, okay, well, you don't have any choice. You got to raise taxes. You know, what he should have done is, instead of going to the legislature and asking for permission to raise taxes 8% to pay for the schools, he should have asked permission to override the agreement he made on spending more money on the schools and overriding some of the state laws that require him to spend more money. And that would have been a serious way to deal with the budget shortfall.
Let me just be clear. The average cost, including whatever you want to call it, administrative and support, let's call it, is $27,000 per student on average,
Yeah.
as opposed to the cost of educating the student, which is $17,000. Is that much of a gap?
Yeah.
Do you think that perhaps what's happening is the mayor is wary of taking on the school budget after he agreed to spend $15 million more? Was that was not a court-imposed agreement, was it? Or was a threat of court?
Well, it was a threat of that, and then he negotiated with them, and that's what he agreed to.
Okay.
Which, you know, we don't really think he should have agreed to that, but we understand that they were threatening a lot more required spending, but he really didn't stand up and say, no, you can't do this. And we've offered some specific ideas on this non-school related stuff that he could save. The biggest one is busing. I mean, right now you have 9,000 kids in Providence being bused, and not by choice. I mean, they claim, oh, well, they chose to go to this school that's outside of their own neighborhood. No, they didn't. When they go to the school department and they try to enroll in a school, the school department really doesn't let them pick the ones that's in their own neighborhood. In fact, they try to discourage them from doing that. And, you know, we believe that half of the 9,000 students that are being bused, if they were given a choice, would choose to go to their neighborhood school and walk to that school instead of wasting 400 or 500 hours a year riding a school bus. That's just totally wasted time. And they're not seriously trying to do that. That would save $10 million. I mean, you'd have a balanced budget right there without raising taxes doing that. And not only would it save a lot of money, but it would be good for the neighborhoods, it would be good for the kids, there'd be less wasted time. Their parents would be able to get involved with them in their schools, because, you know, a lot of parents in most neighborhoods of the city don't have access to a car during the day. In fact, the Providence Planning Department a few years ago estimated that half of all the families don't have access to a car during the day in most neighborhoods of the city.
Okay.
So obviously if their kid's being bused on the other side of the city, parents aren't going to get involved in the PTA. They can't get involved talking to the teachers or doing anything like that. So it would really improve education. And, you know, I got to tell you, our suggestions are not original. The former superintendent, Harrison Peters, who was brought here by Angelica Infante Green from Tampa, Florida, actually was planning to do a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. And then, you know, when he had to leave for various reasons unrelated to that, you know, the new superintendent came in and never followed up on it, which has pretty much been the case in Providence. When anybody leaves, any proposed changes for the good never follow through. You know, 3 directors of operations ago, Robin Muxian, had done a similar study that determined that even though it's the policy of the school department that 80% of all kids in elementary and middle school be walking distance to school they're going to, she found that citywide it was only 50%, and not one single school in the whole city was meeting that 80% goal, and some were as low as 15%, 1.5. So, I mean, people have come up with these ideas, but they never follow through on any of them.
I'm really puzzled by why all this busing is taking place. Angel, you want to maybe address that? Do you have any understanding of it's not for racial balance or anything like that. What you're saying is a parent really doesn't have a choice. They say, we're going to send your kid across town on a bus?
My understanding is that the original motivation years ago was racial balance, like what happened in Boston.
Right.
But that's long gone now.
Yes.
And I think the problem is, why are we so obsessed with trying to maintain the current system that doesn't reflect the realities of today? You know, busing is one issue, but the thing is that the school system itself is a reflection of something that existed over 100 years ago. They crank out kids like they crank out widgets. And back then, over 100 years ago, if you're getting people ready for an industrial revolution and you're building all these things, that's fine. But we're now in a post-industrial revolution situation, so our education has to reflect that. If it doesn't reflect that, it's not going to do the kids any good. It's not going to do the parents any good either. And that's why I think that regarding busing, regarding what they're being taught, regarding all those type of things, the system has to reflect the realities of what's going on today, instead of being basically a babysitter for the kids and not teaching any useful skills, and especially critical thinking skills that they need to have. You know, before we got on the show, we were talking about AI. AI is going to radically change how education is going to be done. Are the unions ready for that? Are the administrators ready for that? I don't hear that. So given the situation with the crisis that the mayor is confronting, I would have thought this would be a perfect opportunity for him and the city council to start talking about, instead of kicking the can down the road, why don't we start rethinking what we need to do to prepare ourselves for a future that's going to be incredible.
Under state law, well, we referred to this a little bit on a few minutes ago. State law says that real estate taxes can be raised a maximum of 4%. There's a bill that's been put forward in the General Assembly asking for an exemption for Providence to go 8%. And I was talking to one of the leaders and the Democratic leadership in the House, and she said, it's going to go through because they very rarely do they disapprove a municipal request like this. Maybe never. But so that's going to happen. But I guess that's a doubling of the rate of increase. And he's talking about only increasing single-family residences by 4% and reducing all these other desirable objectives. I don't understand how that's even supposed to work. Is that something, I'm missing something here or what?
Well, the big increase is going to be rental properties that are non-owner occupied, but those are people that, I mean, have the least ability to pay more money. I mean, they'd be raised up to 16% on the taxes.
Okay.
Now, unless you got a super generous landlord, he's going to pass that on to them and increase rent to people who can least afford to pay it.
And that's if the landlord wants to put up with that. To their credit, some of the progressive Democrats are arguing against. In fact, I think Representative Sanchez voted against the bill when it was in the House before they sent it over to the Senate. And I think they recognize the danger of what this is going to do, not only for people that can't afford their rent, but what happens if the landlord says, you know what, I'm sick and tired of these rent increases.
Yep.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sell to a hedge fund. The hedge fund is going to take it over. It's going to do this, that, and the other thing. And that means that you're going to help to destroy those neighborhoods. Almost like the Vietnam analogy. We had to destroy the village in order to save it. You know? That's how crazy that is. And some of the progressives get it. I don't understand why the other Democrats who claim to be, they're concerned about the working class, they're concerned about neighborhoods and stuff like that, they don't see the danger of those neighborhoods if they go ahead with this tax increase.
Are there any Republicans on the Providence City Council?
No, there hasn't been an elected Republican in any office in Providence since 1992.
Well, they're hard to be the loyal opposition when there's no representation on the council.
Exactly.
All you can do is issue reports, and so hopefully people's attention will be called to it.
Yeah.
Well, the mayor missed an opportunity because Dave had put in an application for the appointed section of the school department. You know, they have the elected and they have the appointed.
School committee, yeah.
Exactly, the school committee. So he put in his name, and of course he's been involved in the community for a long time. He understands education issues and all that. And the mayor knows, of course, he's a Republican, so you would have thought that he would like to have an alternative voice, an alternative opinion to raise issues that are coming down the pike. He had the opportunity to do that. He chose not to.
Right.
Yeah.
There are no, I don't think, are there any Republicans on the school committee?
No, I ran for that. I finished second out of 4 candidates, which doesn't get you elected at all because they only elected 1 per district. But, you talk about the appointments, there's several hundred members of boards or commissions in the city of Providence, and there are 7,300 registered Republicans in the city of Providence. Just they're spread out throughout the city, which is why none of them are elected. So you'd figure at least some of them would be appointed to boards or commissions in the city. Now, outside of the Board of Canvassers, which by state law has to include one Republican.
Right.
Other than that, how many registered Republicans would you guess are on any board or commission in the city of Providence?
Wild guess? None.
You are correct.
Well,
and that's a shame.
I'll take the political question for 500.
Yeah, because we'd like to be part of the solution. I mean, what we would love to have is for the mayor to be watching this edition of State of the State and say, these guys have some really good ideas, and I'm going to adopt them as my own. I'm going to take credit for them and not give them any credit, but I'm going to make them happen. I'm not holding my breath waiting for that to happen.
Good. I guess my question is, I think Providence is the only one. It's like a hybrid thing. The mayor gets to appoint people to the school committee, and then there are some elected people. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, up until last year, it was actually all appointed.
I thought
and Providence was the only one of the 39 communities that had that, and then we had the appointed opportunity, and it's unfortunate because most of the people who went in and voted, they had names from top to bottom as determined by lottery, and everybody voted for the first name. Every one of the 5 districts, the first name automatically got 1,500 votes just for being a living, breathing human being.
Yep.
And I was listed last out of the 4, and I still finished second, but it wasn't good enough.
Well, I'm sympathetic towards what the mayor is up against. I'm not sympathetic towards the budget he put together. I'm sympathetic for the city councilors as to what they're going to do. But I would say to them that here's an opportunity. Instead of kicking the can down the road like your predecessors have, here's an opportunity to really start changing things, because there's no guarantee that the federal funds that the city relies on is going to continue to come in light of what's happening in Washington. There's no guarantee anything is going to keep on going the way that it's going. We have to get ready for some radical changes that are happening in our country, in our state, and in our city. And they have to be on board with that. They have to start talking about that. This is not a Republican versus Democrat, conservative versus liberal. This is a huge change that's coming along that we need to be prepared for, because the rest of the world is getting ready to take off. Yep. We're not, and we have to get ready for that.
The jobs that were funded by, I call it COVID cash, a lot of school departments added people with these temporary, supposedly temporary jobs. None of those are any of those being eliminated?
We haven't been able to figure that out, but we're guessing that most of them are not. And, I talked to the principal at the school in my neighborhood. I'm actually on the school improvement teams for both schools in this neighborhood where our studio is, Reservoir Avenue and Alvarez High. And I talked to the principals, and they tell me that they're having a hard time getting by with what they have and getting them funded, and yet the city is spending it like crazy. So I don't really know quite what's going on there.
I think, well, as I said, I met with a member of the leadership in the House earlier today, and we were talking about the governor's budget proposal. And we had Governor McKee on last week, and I asked him about this $14 billion plus budget includes what they got from the COVID cash, because before COVID, there was a little less than $10 billion. And he kind of thought, well, we're going to grow our way out of this problem somehow,
But a lot of growth.
But yeah, so you go from just under $10 billion to just over $14 billion, and that is predicated on getting all this one-time money. And I guess everybody's done it. I understand the governor.
But Dick, the thing is, you're right. They've always done it, but that's coming to an end. The ability for us to keep on getting money that we keep on printing ad nauseum with nothing to back it, the rest of the world is heading back towards a commodities-based economic system. And we're still stuck on a debt-driven, fiat currency-driven system. That's not sustainable. It's on the verge of collapse. And we have to recognize that, and we have to start preparing ourselves for that change.
Well, hopefully they will prepare, but I don't know, as long as people can spend money at federal, state, and municipal levels, they will do it. It's very hard to cut spending, as you well know.
That's right.
You talked about these contracts, and do you have any examples of some of the contracts that are questionable?
Well, the busing one is a $22 million contract, and we'd like to cut that one in half. And some of the others, I got to be honest with you, I don't have a clue what they do. I'm not sure if anybody else does.
Do you have any specific examples that come to mind?
I know there's a lot of special education. There's some very expensive contracts there. Kids that they're actually busing outside of the city for special programs, and some of these kids are spending $100,000 a year on them or more than that. And and the mayor complains about that really adds up to multi-millions of dollars. And he's even talked about trying to bring some of those things back into the city and not have private people doing them. So I know that's a big one. And some of the others, I honestly don't even know what they do.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. A lot of these jobs that were supposedly COVID relief type things, the money is just squandered away, and a lot of the positions. I mean, President Trump tried to eliminate some of these jobs here in Rhode Island. At the Department of Agriculture. Well, explain to me why we need an archaeologist in the Department of Agriculture office in Providence. But nevertheless, it is very difficult to do. You talked, I think, in your press release about reforming the teacher's contract. How many years left in your contract?
Well, they're actually negotiating a new one right now,
Okay.
and supposedly they've come to a tentative agreement. I mean, the state still controls this, so the city doesn't have the control, but we're going to be stuck with it, even after we take back control of the schools in the city. And I'll tell you, it isn't so much the money part that bothers me, it's the control. There's two things I would like to see the state do in the new teacher's contract that they can do, because they can impose a lot of stuff by state law, whereas the city cannot. I mean, the teachers union doesn't go along with what the city requests. There's not a thing the city can do about it, but the state can. And the two things I'd like to see them control is, one of them, give principals the ability to run their own schools, and the other one is to eliminate the work-to-rule provisions in there. And let me give you an example of each of those that has been a real abuse. On the principals having control of the school, I work together with Representative Perez over in the Silver Lake area, and one of the schools that we have is on Laurel Hill Avenue, which is right next door to the big charter school, Achievement First, at the corner of Hartford Avenue and Laurel Hill. Achievement First has a beautiful playground area, a nice field. Kids can run around, play. The kids who go to Laurel Hill School, they basically do recess on a concrete parking lot. So we, talk to the people in Achievement First and says, would you be willing to let the kids at the elementary school, the public school, use your playground when you're not using it yourself? And they said, we'd be thrilled to do that. So we went back to the principal, and, and he came back to us and says, I asked the teachers, and they refused to cooperate with the charter school, and so we have to continue using the concrete parking lot. This was a principal who had come here from Hawaii, of all places, because he wanted to work with inner city school kids. And he basically got fed up and he left, and he's now the superintendent of the school system in Middletown. But I mean, he would have loved to have had his kids use a nice playground. So that's an abuse right there. On the work
you understand why that happened. The teachers union doesn't want to do anything to support charter schools.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And let me give you another example.
Even though they're becoming unionized, charter schools.
Are they?
Yeah.
Well, one of them is Paul Cuffey, as most of them are not. But, to give you an example on the work-to-rule thing, because the elementary schools in Providence don't start till after 9 a.m., and parents have to go to work, so a lot of times they drop the kid off outdoors in the playground next to the school. And the kids can't go inside the building until 9 o'clock because it's in the teachers union contract. And so if it's snowing out, if it's raining out, the kids are outdoors and they're not allowed indoors. So I talked to one of the teachers at one of the schools on the west side of the city, and she told me, I'm not supposed to do this and I'll get in trouble with the union, but I open up the door and I let these kids in out of the rain.
Yeah.
I mean, what an attitude. She's worried about antagonizing the union by
Yeah.
doing that. That's why
No,
I
that's
won't.
common.
That's why I won't tell you what school it is, so I don't get
Right.
her in
No,
trouble.
no, it's not unique to Providence either. I mean, this situation exists any school district.
But see, the attitude of the unions along those lines is mechanistic, reflective of the mechanistic approach to education. So they're treating these kids not like human beings, but like widgets. And we live in a different world today. You could afford to have done that over 100 years ago, and maybe that's why you had to have union people to fight that type of a system. But now the union is becoming, in many ways, a detriment to the kids that they're supposed to be teaching. They need to adapt to new realities of teaching. They need to adapt to new ways of doing things. If they keep on being rigid, that's why we're going to keep on having problems. We're going to have more people going to charter schools, more people going to private
If
schools.
they allow them to have more charter schools.
Well,
Right now, they're all in a lottery system anyway.
Let me give you some numbers on
Huge
this,
number.
Dick. 10 years ago, there were 32,000 school-aged kids in Providence. Only 8,000 of them were outside of the public school system, mostly private and parochial at that time, and 24,000 in the
We've
traditional.
only got like 1 minute left. So.
Okay, now the numbers have changed. Now it's 19,000 in traditional public schools and 11,000 outside, mostly in charters.
Yeah.
When the current charter schools expand to their full capacity, say by about the year 2030, it's going to be 15,000 and 15,000, even if we don't get any new charter schools, which there's still a demand for. So, I mean, it's coming, but it's too slow.
You said you had an opportunity, I'll wind up with this question. You said you had an opportunity to look at this auditor's report on the school system. Did you get any sense as to why it hasn't been made more public?
I don't. Obviously, the mayor doesn't want it made public because then people will ask, why are you asking for a tax increase?
I see.
That's clearly
That's the
the
obvious.
reason.
Okay, that's, yeah. I think this is a classical problem in the schools. Who runs the schools? Do the unions run it, or the administration, or who? And your union is the AFT, right?
I'm not even sure.
I'm not sure either.
Okay, I'm pretty sure it is, but AFT, of course, is headed by Randy Weingarten, so I don't. Anybody who recognizes that name will know what the story is.
Well,
So-
especially during the COVID, what a disaster her decisions were.
Yes. And we want to thank everyone for watching this edition of State of the State, and we hope you found it interesting. And perhaps if you're a resident of Providence, you can reach out to your representative and ask them why they're not seeking some more diverse opinions on some of the issues that come before the council. I want to thank you for watching State of the State.